Welcome to Your Yes-Filled Life. I'm your host, Brenda Winkle, educator, healer, speaker, guide, and fierce advocate for your yes. I help sensitive and successful men and women find, reclaim, and live from their full embodied yes. Through empowering you to understand your energetic hygiene, establish healthy boundaries, and heal your nervous system, you'll be able to create your yes-filled life and move through your days with more freedom, more ease, and more joy. You'll hear inspiring stories of people who found their full-bodied yes, thought leaders who pursued their own dreams and are living life on their terms, and learn new ways to find the courage, joy, ease, and freedom to more fully step into your yes-filled life. Say no to the good so you can say yes to the great. Join me on this journey to discover your yes-filled life. Whether you're looking to break free from the golden handcuffs, start a new business, find your dream job, or simply live with more intention and mindfulness, I've got you covered. Let's explore the possibilities together and make your dreams a reality. Ready? Let's do this. Let's get you to your yes-filled life. Hello, and welcome to Your Yes-Filled Life. I'm your host, Brenda Winkle. I'm so glad you're here today. It's a chilly day in November in the Portland area, and Bentley and I just got back from a walk, and I poured myself a cup of tea. My friends, Megan and Aaron and I, we have traveled around to a couple different places, and Megan introduced us to this store called the Tea and Spice Exchange in her hometown of Chagrin Falls. And when Megan and Aaron came to visit me in May, we just did a Google search, and what do you know? There's a Tea and Spice Exchange in Portland. And so I stocked up, and one of my current favorites is called Bourbon Chestnut. And it's like this rich, caramelly, warm, soothing herbal tea. And it is so delicious. And so I'm just sipping this cup of tea, ready to chat with you. I'm so glad you're here. If you're new, welcome. Thank you for tuning in. If you've been listening for a while, thank you. Thank you. You know, I sent out a call a couple of podcast episodes ago that we were approaching the 10,000 download mark. And I asked for your help in sharing the podcast. And oh my goodness, have you delivered? As of the last time I checked, in the last 3 weeks, we've not only crossed the threshold. Oh, I mixed that up. Crossed the threshold of 10,000 downloads, but we're at almost 13,000. So thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your ratings. Thank you for your reviews. That is really one of the most helpful things you can do for any podcast. Except for this, you can share the episodes that you love with a friend or loved one. So today, as I sip my tea with you, in fact, I'm going to take a little sip right now. It's so good. I encourage you to create a beverage of your choice and just join me on whether it's your commute or washing the dishes or just a walk. Oh, let's just put down some of the worries and dive into some feeling good. So our conversation today is going to be about boundaries, what they are, how to set them, why we need them. And so the short answer is boundaries are the how-to manual for you. And boundaries are the way to manage expectations, not only for yourself, but for other people. Boundaries are a way that we can increase our healthy communication. They're a way that we can make sure we're feeling good, that we have really clean communication with our loved ones, and that we're just feeling grounded and responsive as opposed to reactive. So there are some places where your boundary setting might be going off the rails. There are 3 ways that I've come across. One is that you think you're setting a boundary, but you're not. And in this case, what you might be doing instead is making a demand or not using your words and expecting people to read your mind about the boundaries, or not using your words and then exploding when the boundary that, by the way, no one knows about is crossed. that happens more often than you would expect. And the fourth thing is boundaries are difficult to recognize in other people. And so we are not able to see when another person sets a boundary because we're not able to set the boundaries in a way that's really impactful and effective on our own. So we'll be talking about how to deal with all those. The second place that your boundary setting might be going off the rails is that you want to set a boundary. You know you need to set a boundary. You even have the words figured out of how you want to set the boundary, but you feel frozen, simply unable to do it. Now, if this happens to you, you're not weak. You're not bad. You're not a bad communicator. What's happened is that you've crossed the safety threshold of your nervous system. And so now your nervous system is paralyzing you because it perceives the actual act of setting a boundary as a threat. We'll talk about what to do about that. And the third way that your boundary setting might be going off the rails is that you're waiting to set the boundary until too late. And then instead of boundary setting, you're actually in conflict management. And when we think we're setting a boundary, but we're actually in conflict management, it's a different skill set. There's different strategies involved. And it can make boundary setting feel really scary because you're telling yourself, see, I knew if I set this boundary, there'd be conflict. Which, by the way, boundary setting does not necessarily minimize conflict, but it can prevent some conflict. And conflict is not in itself bad. Conflict is a necessary part of healthy relationships. Why? Because you're not going to agree with everybody 100% of the time. We can have a civil conversation and not agree. And that could technically be defined as conflict. Conflict should not be aggressive or violent. Conflict should not end up in canceling out each other or deciding that you can't be in relationship with someone with whom you don't agree. Because the reality is, you're not going to agree with everybody. And there's some people that you really love in your life who probably have different opinions than you on a lot of different things. Now, if conflict in your life is violent or aggressive, I would say it would be time to reach out and get a second professional opinion. Invitation to check out thehotline.org and just make sure that what you're experiencing is not abuse. Now, here are some ways that sometimes boundary setting can be tricky and also what to do. So we're just going to be talking about, here's the problem for most of us when we talk about setting boundaries. So there are two big problems that I see in my clients, that I've noticed in myself, that I notice in my family and my other relationships. Number one is that we wait past the point of setting the boundary. And so we're actually in conflict management with, a lot of emotions. And this makes the boundary setting feel really scary. So if we're in conflict management, that's not actually boundary setting. That's something really different. And in that instance, I would invite you to take some deep breaths. Let's do one together. And remember that you can actually disagree with another person. And if it feels really scary, I understand. That's okay. Let's just add some breath to that. And we'll come more into that in a little bit. And then the other place that we get our boundaries a little bit mixed up is that you think people should be able to read your mind or your body language. And then you feel really frustrated or even angry if they don't. And then as kind of a default, when this happens, it's so easy to make the other person bad. So let me tell you a little story. Last week, Bentley and I went for a walk in the park in Southeast Portland. And Portland it's known for beautiful parks, lots of old growth trees, both the deciduous trees that are turning colors for the fall and whose leaves are falling, and the giant evergreens. So we were walking along this narrow trail in a park. And a little background on Bentley. He is my 9-month-old Greyhound mixed puppy. And I adopted him after he'd been in foster care. He ended up in foster care. He came up the I-5 corridor after he'd been hit by a car as a 3-month-old puppy. He broke his pelvis and he spent the next 2 months in a crate. So months 3 through 5 were spent in a crate, which means he missed out on some really key socialization. So we've been working to me and Bentley, we've been working to really socialize him and get him less anxious around other dogs. He just doesn't know what to make of them. He doesn't know how to respond. He gets overly excited when he comes up to them and then they don't like that, or he gets fearful and then he barks at them and also they don't like that. And so what I've been doing is lots of treats, lots of exposure. And then when we're on a trail and we're going to be coming up on another dog, we just pull off the trail. Well, in this particular instance, in this particular park, it was a very narrow trail. So on one side is kind of a steep hill that goes down, down, down into a ravine with a little creek. And on the other side, there is giant trees and a very steep incline as it goes up. And so the giant trees, you can't get your arms all the way around them. So there's really nowhere to get off the trail as much as get on the side of the trail. So I didn't say anything to anybody when this man came into view. Very handsome man, by the way, with a black and white dog coming toward us. Instead, I just took my eyes from the trail, put them down to Bentley. I was bent down, feeding him treats, asking him to watch me, giving him commands to try to distract him. I never made eye contact with the man until his dog was right there in Bentley's face. And Bentley went nuts. He was barking at him. And then I said to the man, I was like, we're working on some reactivity and my dog doesn't know what to do. And so then the man's like, oh, I'm so sorry, and kept on walking. And 2 things went through my head kind of in the same moment. The first one was, oh my gosh, that man actually was approaching to talk to me. He wanted to have a conversation and I missed out, which is kind of a bummer. But the second thing that I realized as I walked off kind of indignantly for the first few steps, I'm like, geez, couldn't he see that I was bent over feeding the dog treats and working with them? And then I thought, wait a minute, maybe he thought I was waiting for him. I never told him anything. I didn't use any words. I didn't use any body language. All I did was focus on Bentley. How could this man have known what I was doing? There's no way he could have, because seeing a person bent over with their dog could mean you're adjusting their leash. It could mean you're adjusting their coat. It could have been any number of those things. So when I was a little kid, I heard about boundaries when Melody Beattie's book, Codependent No More, came about, like in the 80s. And my mom read it and she had it on the bookshelf, in like laying on top of the bookshelf as a sort of a badge. Like, you should all be reading Codependent No More because we're going to be setting boundaries. And so when I grew up, I really felt like boundaries were about controlling other people because that was my perception of boundaries. I thought that when my mom set a boundary, it was controlling me. And so I grew up thinking that boundaries were a way to control other people. I thought boundaries were a way to manage the problems that other people created. And I also thought boundaries were the other person's problem, as in they weren't respecting boundaries. It wasn't until much, much later that I realized none of that is true. None of that is true. I didn't realize that it's my responsibility to set and honor and also hold my own boundaries, just as much as it's my responsibility to honor yours. So I heard myself saying, that guy, Maya and her Chewini Jane, who used to be our Chewini Jane, were walking with me. And I was like, that guy, blah, 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 angrily, kind of stomping around. I can't believe he and the dog. And then I stopped for just a second and I was just recalling the memory that had happened just a moment before. And I remembered this, by the way, handsome man was smiling at me. He was smiling at me, approaching me pleasantly, and I missed it. I missed it. So I decided at that time, this was like last, I think Saturday, I decided I was going to make a point to be vocal about what I was doing with Bentley. So the next day we went to a different park. And every time I saw a dog approaching, as soon as I got within appropriate speaking distance of the other owner, I would pull Bentley over and I would say, "We're working on reactivity. My dog gets really anxious and he needs a lot of space." And I had the best conversations with people. In some cases, people would say, "Oh, we're working on reactivity too. Thank you so much for verbalizing that. I never thought about doing that with other people." And in some cases, they were just thankful. They were like, "Oh, thanks for letting us know." And then they gave us a big space, even on narrow trails. Everyone responded when I asked for what we needed. There was no person in that state park who was like, "No, I'm not going to give you your space. I'm not going to give your dog the space that it needs." So all this is to say, it was a really tangible reminder of how easy it is for us to get upset at other people because we haven't set a boundary. Does that feel relatable? So here are some of the things that I've discovered over the years, not only in teaching boundaries, but in just living my life. Number one is boundary setting requires words. I know this seems simple, but it is really important to recognize we have to actually speak our boundaries. People cannot read our minds. And even if they can, or if they could, or even if you think they should, that is not healthy boundary setting. Just because you've lived with somebody for 20 years doesn't mean they understand what you need unless you say it. Number two, you can only set boundaries to the point that you've healed your nervous system. So the more you increase your window of tolerance, that means healing your nervous system, getting back to a wider window of tolerance, the better you get at setting boundaries because it's safer for your nervous system. Your nervous system isn't getting tripped and triggered by trying to set the boundary because you're no longer perceiving it as a threat because you're healing that part of your nervous system. Number three, setting boundaries requires you to hold the boundary. When you set the boundary, then hold it. That's your side of the street. Boundaries are never about controlling the actions of another person. That's not a boundary. Boundaries are about saying what works for you, what you will do, what you will agree to, what you won't agree to. It's never about the other person. And number four, one of the least talked about but most important parts of boundaries are the internal boundaries that you set with yourself. These are the promises that you make, the agreements, things like, I told myself I wouldn't eat chocolate cake in the evening because I don't sleep well. Or I promised myself I'd exercise every day for at least 30 minutes. Or I promised myself I would take time to journal and do something fun once a week. So I'm curious, what kinds of things have you promised to yourself? When we break those promises to ourselves and we violate our own boundaries, that is one of the biggest sources of pain imaginable. We have to become trustworthy for ourselves. Now, I know you are someone who longs for deep connection with others and within yourself. I know that you're someone who values your relationships and you prioritize them. I know this because that's the kind of people I attract. I also want those deep connections and really rich relationships. And so I've been thinking about this a lot lately and realizing that even though you're sensitive and you're compassionate and you're really good at what you do, that sometimes boundary setting feels kind of hard. So I have created a brand new training called Boundary Setting for the Sensitive and Compassionate. In this 1 hour free masterclass, you'll learn some breath work to expand your capacity to feel safe setting boundaries while maintaining your compassion so that you can set those healthy boundaries. You'll learn to put kindness first without feeling weak or avoiding setting the boundary. And more commonly, avoid rolling back the boundary after it's set. You'll learn how to recognize when a boundary is needed earlier so that you can avoid the conflict management and actually be setting the boundaries to prevent the conflict management. And you'll learn how to confidently set boundaries with some boundary statement frameworks. This is a free masterclass that I'm hosting on November 30th at 9 a.m. Pacific. So 9 a.m. Pacific, it'll be an hour long, and we'll be doing some breath work, and I'll be teaching on boundaries. You can save your spot in this free training at brendawinkle.com/boundary, BOUNDARY. And you can get free access to the masterclass. I'd love to see you there because I am specifically talking about how to set boundaries as someone who is sensitive, someone who's compassionate, someone who might be highly sensitive. Did you know that recent studies have revealed that up to 30% of the population is actually highly sensitive? What it means when you're highly sensitive, and I'll link some other podcast episodes in the show notes about highly sensitive people if you're curious. But what it means is that you have more neuroreceptors and neurotransmitters in your brain. You literally have increased sensitivity. Now, this is not diagnosable. It's not disorder. It literally just means you have more ways to sense than other people. And there's a subset of highly sensitive people that are also empaths, meaning they can feel and sense the emotional states of others in their own bodies. Now, whether you're an empath or a highly sensitive person, one of the characteristics of these people is that we can very, very easily read the emotions on the faces of people we're talking to, which can make boundary setting really difficult because it happens on like a millisecond moment where we recognize that setting the boundary made somebody uncomfortable. And so if we don't learn how to do that as highly sensitive people, it becomes easy for us to either A, not set the boundary at all, or B, roll back the boundary until we're frustrated or even angry. And so I hope you'll come join this free masterclass. And I have something really special that I am excited about. I'm also hosting a new moon ceremony with breathwork on December 12th. I'll put the link to that in the show notes too. And you can get that for a Black Friday special of $79 if you enroll before November 30th. And on November 30th, the price goes up to $119 for that new moon ceremony with breathwork. It is the last new moon of 2023. And I don't know if you know about new moon energy, but new moon energy is a great time to call in new things. So we're going to be setting intentions and journaling and reflecting and building community. And of course, we'll enjoy a breathwork experience in that as well. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope that this helps you know a little bit more about boundaries for yourself, for other people in your family. And I would love to see you inside that free masterclass. If you loved this episode, would you please share it with your friend? And if you haven't left the podcast a rating or a review yet, could you please go do that right now? It really is one of the most helpful things you can do to help the podcast. Bye for now. Until next time.